Welcome to our video series, What CEOs Learn from Board Roles. We are delighted to have with us Marilia Rocca, CEO of Grupo Hinode, the largest marketing multi-level consumer goods company in Brazil, with operations also in Latin America. Marilia is also non-executive director of Banco Santander, the Brazilian subsidiary of the Spanish Santander Group, which is the third largest private bank in Brazil and the only international bank with scale in the country. Marilia, welcome and thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Oh, thank you. I think it's a great opportunity to think about the issues involving an independent board member and a CEO. So it's a great pleasure.
Great, thank you so much for your time. And let me start with the questions, okay? So you became CEO of Grupo Hinode in 2018, following being an advisory board member. Before this time, you were a director of various public and private companies. Do you believe that the perspectives gained through different industries and roles has helped facilitate you being a more forward-thinking CEO?
I think that the most common approach is to think that you are a governance expert. And it's true that you go through different situations and contexts, and that probably expedites your learning curve about so many issues, ranging from HR issues, financing, fundraising, M&A. So in a way, you not even get a very good perspective of different situations that you could face as a CEO, but you also see it from a government perspective. So which are the steps that need to be taken by a CEO to consider shareholders' issues, to consider problems with suppliers, competitors. So I think that this forward-thinking and also this holistic approach to problems is something that the boardroom gives to you in a very pragmatic and concrete way. But it's not only about that. I also feel that it gives you a way to exercise your empathy regarding management. So you can refer very easily to how a CEO will feel. For instance, if you want to run a strategic assessment about the future plans of the company and you're not involving management as you should. So this empathy helps you to design which are the roles and where are those very tricky, how can I put it, but where are the tricky limits of where should I go as a board member, a director, and up to what point I should go as a CEO. And I think that having that awareness early on, while I was still a managing director in an NGO or even a VP in a public company such as TOTUS, helped me to be a better CEO and vice versa.
Interesting. Thank you so much. So let's move on to the next question. What are both the benefits and the challenges of having a non-executive directorship in a different industry to your executive role?
I'm in a very privileged position in a sense that being in a bank allows you to have a clear understanding of what the economics are playing out, right? So even like considering the pandemic at Santander, we were looking at the possible impacts of the pandemic early in December 2019, while we actually only went into lockdown in March. So in March, we were already considering, we already had plans for how we were bringing up our stocks and how we were going to send merchandise to different countries. So it gives you a forward-thinking, especially when you're in a bank. It's a very special type of board, but you could extrapolate from being in a bank to any other types of industries. for instance, when you're looking at technology, for instance, and you're a board member in a technology company, you probably are going to approach your decisions regarding when you're going to accelerate your timeline, your roadmap of future upgrades, or even like exchange some of the technology that you're using today. And you actually raise the bar in many ways, for instance, in terms of digitalization, just because you are in a perspective where you're in a special position where you can see different examples of how it could be done better than, maybe, your management team can think about it. So thinking out of the box, lots of times you can bring best practices from those companies. And it can work either way, right? You can also be doing, let's say, a fabulous job as far as bringing up your ESG projects to a different approach, and you might be doing that in your company better than it's being done in the company where you're sitting on the board. Sure. So there's a lot of exchange between both experiences.
It's a two-way experience, right?
Definitely. Board positions makes you a well-rounded executive. It's a hands-on experience and gives you and puts you in a position where you can reflect upon your challenges in sort of a distance, right? And that gives you a perspective that it's much better than when you are so involved in the day-to-day that you cannot take enough distance to think about it the way you should.
Fully agree. Very interesting. And by the way, you mentioned about ESG and regarding ESG, diversity and inclusion is now a must-have in any business agenda. Definitely. And we know that Grupo Hinode is proud of its inclusivity, welcoming everyone with open arms, and of course having a female CEO, right? So how are you tackling D&I as a CEO, and what are the differences in how D&I is tackled in your experience as CEO compared to your non-executive roles?
We are very different places. Like Santander is a benchmark in terms of ESG practices. It's a benchmark worldwide, has been recognized even at Forbes as one of the top 5 companies in the world in terms of social impact and the way it's measured and so on. Hinode, at the other side of the spectrum, is a company that's almost a social enterprise. It's really stakeholder capitalism from, like on the roots, because it has a very generous business model. It pays off 51% of its revenues as part of bonus to the consultants that work as independent consultants for our group in Latin America. So I can say that probably our business model, it's extremely high impact in terms of social impact and income distribution. However, we never approached in a very systematic way, for instance, our environmental impact. And when you look at Santander, it has been doing that in a very strategic manner. It has been doing like assessments, materiality matrix, and assessing both dimensions. So it's looking at how the bank maximizes its impact and which type of impact brings most value to society. So it's really taken to a different level. They just run its first materiality assessment in the beginning of the year. So the maturity levels of both companies are very different. And it's very curious to see a company like Hinode, where the social impact is inherent to the business model. And on the other side, at Santander, the social impact is a result of products or a result of lines of services and it's more difficult to measure, for instance. So I find it quite amusing. For instance, at Hinode, when we decided to measure, what's the participation of women in leadership. When we ran the first analysis, we found out we were already 51% of leadership at the company with no type of special program or affirmative actions, just because the founder was a female. Mm-hmm. The company doesn't have a lot of bias that you see in many companies. So there are a lot of aspects that affect the companies when it comes to ESG practice, ranging from who founded the company and to, how the company has been actually managed.
Yeah, indeed. And as a board member, you mentioned a little about it, but as a board member, how are you facilitating or overseeing Santander's ESG commitments, especially knowing that Santander has ESG on a such developed way, right?
Yeah, ESG at Santander, and I would say at the banking industry, is being challenged in many ways, because banks have assumed a commitment of net zero by 2050, and that compromises also, or that includes also the portfolio of the banks. So that means that Santander has not only to look at its own impact, but the impact of all customers it has. And the commitment is to zero out the impact of the whole portfolio. So the forces you see at play are very interesting. The first approach, you have to explain to investors that you're actually adding value and not creating just limitations and restrictions when it comes to a commitment like that. Because, there are new asset classes even. Like when you look at carbon credits, for instance, it's a great opportunity. You can trade them, you can issue them, you can custody them. So you have to think about it in a broader way. Not only because you're including your portfolio as part of your direct impact, and your commitments include companies that are way beyond your own management, capabilities. And at the same time, you have impact in your products, in your activities, and some of the impacts have to be measured for many, many years. How do you bring, for instance, consistency to this measurement of impact over time? How do you make sure that you're not doing greenwashing and that you're actually dealing with green impact? So you need to establish a very strong governance. And Santander has that done in many different levels, at the local level, at the subsidiary level, at the holding company. But you have to look at the governance to ensure that you're measuring the same thing in all markets. And on top of that, you have to work with regulators, because what's going on with ESG, different from other regulatory issues, is that global standards are falling behind local standards. So you have to comply with ESG regulation. Maybe at, Banco Central in Brazil, the central bank in Brazil, is establishing rules and measurements and KPIs which are different from the central bank in Europe. So you have to work with advocacy to push for global standards. So Santander deals with that in very different ways. We have been connecting the chairs of the sustainability committees throughout the countries to exchange better practices. So it's an effort of the board. It now implies a lot in risks also, Paulo, because ESG, the climate risks that have to be taken into account by boards in different industries, not only banks, now have to take into consideration environmental risks, non-traditional risks. So the ESG committees have to work with auditing committee, risk committee. You need to start working with joint committees. This is going beyond what ESG committees were looking like just 2 years ago. Yeah. But I find it exciting, and I feel that it's a path that we all need to go through together, like not only as banks, but as companies as a whole. And I believe that the financial industry has a great role to play.
Fully agree, and looks truly exciting. This and with a complex that makes it much more interesting to work on.
Very challenging. Very challenging.
Yeah, indeed. All right, Marilia, thank you so much for being here today with us. It's always a pleasure talking to you and learn from you. And I hope we can have another in the next meeting. We can have a coffee together presentially, not by video. Thank you so much.
I'm looking forward to that, Paulo. And you're picking up the check, right?
Yeah, that's it.